Hey guys, and welcome to a new interview on my channel. And today we have a very special interview with New Zealand author Philip Temple. But why are we talking? New Zealand used to have a two-party system, but in 1993 people made a referendum where they pushed for another election system, and they actually won and changed it to a proportional system. Before that they only really had Labour on the left and National on the right, but after that they had a number of new political parties, and I think it's something everybody profits from, if you're on the left or on the right or in the center, as there's a much better form of freedom of speech and assembly, and Philip Temple was one of the men who actually did it. He participated in various debates where he pushed for the MMP system, and I was able to do an interview with him where he's talking about these types of issues. And I really feel like this is a once in a lifetime thing, so I'm very proud of having done it. And of course on this channel we are all about voting reform, and we also talked a bit about different countries and how other countries can do it. So there's something for everybody. As I don't say it in the interview, definitely subscribe to the channel for more interviews. We are on the road to 5k, and I have even more cool ideas for interviews. Therefore do it so you won't miss any other videos. And also leave a like to support the video and the channel. That way I can say that you're enjoying these types of video. And with that, here we are going to start. And don't forget, you can also hear this as a form of podcast if you are doing chores and stuff like that, but there's also the video if you care and want to see it. Imagine you meet a stranger and have 90 seconds to explain who you are and what you do. What would you say?
And have been an independent author for over 50 years and write across all genres and have won quite a lot of awards for my books. And I'm currently semi-retired. Yeah, writers never actually retire because there's always something niggling away at the back of your head about what you want to talk about. For example, recently I wrote an article about MMP for our local newspaper because it was being attacked by right-wingers as a source of our government problems, which is the usual technique that politicians use, attack the electoral system rather than their own problems.
Yeah.
It isn't enough.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of similar. There's also in Germany now the fight between like the conservatives who want to change the election system and people on like the liberal left and everybody else wanting to keep it. But how did you become interested in voting reform?
Well, I'd always been interested in, politics, what was going on, and I had never been directly involved, but things were getting so bad in the general electoral system in New Zealand back in the early 1980s that I wondered what to do. What happened was that during the period from 1975 to 1984, we had a very domineering prime minister who was quite autocratic. He was also Minister of Finance, and he was clearly going beyond what his support had been at elections. What we were getting, we were under first past the post, which was the Westminster, the English electoral system, and one house and just two parties essentially. And often this particular politician would manipulate the votes in certain electorates where he knew he would end up getting a one-seat majority in the parliament and then total kind of dictatorship. So clearly something was wrong. And alternative parties, there was only one really at the time, Social Credit, in one election, I think 1981, they got 20-odd% of the vote, but only two seats. So clearly something was wrong. And then we all thought in 1984, when we got rid of him and the Labour Party, which is the left-wing party, came in, that we would get back to what had been normal before this Prime Minister Muldoon. Instead of which, without telling the electorate, they introduced Thatcherite free market reforms, completely turned up over the country, and this caused a great deal of distress. And so what happened was that I was really disgusted with what had happened, and I didn't actually vote in 1987. We had 3-year terms, and I was in England at the time, but also I was at the time I was going backwards and forwards to Germany, in particular Berlin, West Berlin. But when I was in England, I was talking to somebody who was a member of the Labour Party there, and they said, why don't you join the Labour Party in New Zealand and try and fix things? So when I came back, I had a look at that, but realised it didn't matter what, were you just a member, you couldn't, it was really the cabinet, and the leaders who decided everything. And then at the beginning of 1990, I moved from Wellington, which is the capital, down here to Dunedin in the South Island, and I was complaining about everything. And someone said, oh, you must go and talk to this a man called Neville Peat. He is the local chair of the Electoral Reform Coalition. And I said, well, what's that? And so I went and talked to him, and he told me all about what had been going on with a group trying to change the electoral system. So what had happened was that apparently back in as early as 1978, there had been a group who thought that the first past the post system provided elected dictatorship, and they sent a petition to Parliament, which of course was ignored. Then in that Labour government 1984-87, there was one really enlightened minister. He was Deputy Prime Minister, but also Minister of Justice, and he remarkably said we need a commission, a royal commission, to look at the electoral system. Royal Commission is a big, the sort of top agency to look at big issues. And in 1986, they produced this big report on all aspects of the electoral. And in it, they recommended that the mixed member proportional system, like the German system, would be the best one for New Zealand. So then that prompted the creation of the Electoral Reform Coalition to try and fight, to get this change. Nobody else in the Labour Party, let alone the National Party, wanted to change. But, this is how things happened, especially in New Zealand. In 1987, during the campaign for that year's election, the then Prime Minister, David Lange, was reading his note, a speech about what the government would do, and he misread the note and said, we will have a referendum on the electoral system. and somebody said to him afterwards, that's not what you were supposed to say. But he couldn't get away from it. He'd actually announced this, and the Electoral Reform Coalition jumped on this and said, oh, that's great, and started campaigning. And then the National Party felt that they had to follow that in order to win the election, right, as one of their policies, not believing for a moment that there would be any change. So when the election occurred in 1990, they came in and said, yes, we will have a referendum. And that's when I started to get deeply involved with the movement, because the atmosphere generally was very favourable for a campaign, because the general population had been deeply disenchanted with politicians after these unannounced, free market reforms. And so it was a fertile ground for arguing to change the system. Not that it was going to be easy, but it was quite a good situation.
I think there's one interesting detail. They're accidentally saying that a policy would happen, and then that having like a big impact. That kind of reminds me of how the Berlin Wall itself fell, because when the Berlin Wall fell, they also accidentally announced it. So that's,
yes,
I think,
exactly. Yes, yeah, because I wasn't there when the wall fell, but I was there for a couple of years beforehand, and also I went to Berlin about a month after the wall came down. Yes, exactly. And there's kind of a build-up, and it just needs something like that, like a trigger, and which everybody's been kind of waiting for. Yeah.
And to go back to the Social Credit Party, how can we understand the party? I think you mentioned them earlier. I think in many other countries, Social Credit was more of a right-wing outfit, but I think in New Zealand they were more getting voters of the left. How can we understand that party?
Sorry, how can we understand the system? Or...
Like the ideology of the Social Credit Party.
Oh, the Social Credit Party was based on monetary theory about how to change the financial and fiscal and tax system. Otherwise, it was a kind of a bit right of centre, and it did have a presence for quite a while because it had quite a good charismatic leader but it was really just a kind of while it existed during the first past the post period, it was really kind of a protest place for voters who couldn't vote for the two main parties. Oh, the interesting thing is that the Muldoon government, one of the reasons it fell in 1984 was that a very prominent businessman created what he called, I think he called it the New Zealand Party, and deliberately to take away votes from Muldoon and the National Party. And he did. He took about 12%, which really helped get rid of him. But he didn't get any seats, of course.
What were your main arguments in favor of MMP?
Well, what happened was that the National Government in 1990 said, right, we will have a non-binding referendum in 1992, September 1992, to see, A, people wanted change, and B, if they do, which alternative system they want. And this is where, as a writer, I felt I could make my biggest support for change. I've been impressed by the role of writers in Germany, people like Christoph Wolff on the east side and, oh gosh, I forgot his name. Anyway, writers in Germany have always had an influence in philosophical and political areas, but not in New Zealand. But I thought I'd seen the effect that people like that could have. And so I looked at the various systems and I produced this small book, which appeared first in June of 92, and then it was so much in demand that it was reprinted immediately before the referendum. And in it, there were four, on the voting paper, they had four. The first part said, do you want change? And if you did, I vote to retain the present system or vote for change to another. And then you had to choose out of four. And there was MMP, STV, PV, which is preferential voting, and supplementary member. The preferential voting is pretty much the system used in Australia, and supplementary member was some kind of think about adding a few onto the first past the post system. It really came down to interest in the two, MMP and STV. And when I was doing research in London, I met with the Electoral Reform Society, which was set up and funded by a woman to promote STV for the UK. And of course that has been used in Ireland since they became independent. I looked at it and I was very attracted to it because it sorted out what people wanted in the candidates presented. But the thing I noticed was that the results from the different elections weren't always proportional. It could often be quite unproportional. And given that governments are made up of parties, it seemed that MMP was the answer because the party list vote was the key to deciding the proportionality of the parties in Parliament. But there's also the first past the post local representation included. And so I decided to promote that, which is what the Electoral Reform Coalition was doing anyway. So when the 1992 referendum was held, it showed a big percentage wanted change and the majority would go for MMP. Now, this is not just our campaign, but it's backed by the Royal Commission. And I think that the national government at the time was a bit startled that it was such a big vote for change. And they said that if there was a clear vote for change, there'd be a binding referendum at the same time as the 1993 general election. What I discovered, as a writer and journalist as well, I had a big advantage in the print media because there's very little coverage of German issues in the New Zealand media. There was only one correspondent, I think, over there who was covering Germany, but not only Germany, but all European stories. And I was going backwards and forwards because of personal reasons, and got support from the Goethe Institute to interview politicians and political scientists in Bonn and Berlin. And this gave me the inside running when it came to writing my little book and also articles and talking on radio about what MMP was. And what I discovered was that my little book was so successful that I could hear other journalists quoting from this book as if it was their own opinions. So you have to realise New Zealand is a fairly small place, and that it has a plus and minus side about New Zealand is you can affect change fairly significantly because it's a small population, and until recently anyway, it's a fairly equal society. Things have changed quite a bit over the last few years. But anyway, it is possible to get change if you really know which levers to pull. And of course, the Labour Party back in 1984 knew this. Get into power, would just turn everything just instantly upside down. It wasn't a slow process. So that's the bad side of that. On the good side, you can get good things done if you work hard enough. And there's a climate of opinion that's going to support you. And I think another climate is developing. It's pretty general, I think, around the world. Actually, is disillusionment with politicians, and so I get the feeling there's going to be other big changes in the next few years. Anyway, that's digressing.
You mentioned that you had the different debates on like for and against MMP, and I think I read that you had like a German political scientist on with like this early 90s satellite technology, and you had to bring him in like a very small window of time where he almost got cut off. That's something that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, this was again, as I said, I had this huge advantage of knowing people in Germany who are involved with electoral politics, and one of the people that I dealt with was Dr. Professor Hans-Dieter Klingelmann, who is at the ZBV in Berlin. Sorry, I might have to email it, but
I have to look it up because I think I looked him up myself, but WBZ.
It's Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin für Sozialforschung.
Yeah, that seems to be it.
Yeah, the WB, VBS in Berlin, and so when it was the last debate actually in 1993 on television, they cut off any broadcast coverage for the referendum a month before the election, and the last one was a live air event at a big studio in Wellington. And beforehand, I was able to talk to the producer of the program who was favourable for MMP, and I said, look, I can get this guy on satellite to come in. He's the expert and he said, okay. So they somehow managed it, because in those days, as you said, you had to get these satellite link at just the right moment before the satellite disappeared around the curve of the Earth. Yeah, and it worked quite well. But this probably brings us to the opposition to reform. Before the 1992 referendum, they really didn't take much notice. The opposition, they were nothing's going to change. It's just a bunch of greenies, and but then they suddenly got a big shock when they saw the results. And so they're all right-wing people. They're all associated, not in, but associated with the National Party, the right-wing party, created a campaign for better government. This is what they call themselves. And they tried to say that it was parliamentary reform that was needed, not electoral reform.
What does that mean? What does parliamentary reform mean? Was it just a word with no policy behind it?
That's right, yeah. But I mean, we could see right through it. But the problem was that, I mean, it's a bit like Germany. By and large, the sort of population swings around the centre, and in many respects, the politics are quite conservative, But anyway, they set this thing up with prominent ex-National Party people, politicians on it, and there was no need at the time to disclose how much money they were raising for it. And so they got some really rich people behind it and bankrolling this, and they were paying for television ads and all kinds of things. But they kept on making mistakes. And one of the key what we did, because we didn't have much money, we worked out that in the end that they probably had well over $2 million. And I think the Reform Coalition got 186,000. So we were focusing on radio, TV interviews, writing articles, letters to the editor, and holding meetings. Whereas they decided to put a lot of money into TV ads, which were really, ridiculous. One was that they said that list MPs would be anonymous, and they had an ad with people walking around with paper bags over their heads, and they made some statements. And what we had to do was to get the message out that these people could not be trusted. And they made some devastating mistake in one of the things they claimed about MMP. And we complained to the Advertising Standards Authority, and they said, yes, this is not true. Now, that was a key moment, because people were, we can't believe anything they're saying, They sort of fell over themselves. Yes, so what was the other thing I was going to say? And really, the people in power, they didn't really think that this was going to happen. And I was in Bonn that year, I think, or early that year, and I went to the New Zealand Embassy just to say hi, and I started talking about this. And the first secretary who saw me listened, and then he said, the minister came through recently, and he said, it's just a storm in a teacup, and I got pretty angry, because they were just saying, you people don't count. And it just, of course, they were completely wrong. And as the campaign went on, it got quite heated. And two prominent, a Labour politician and a National politician, Helen Clark, actually, who became Prime Minister later on, and she at that stage was, she'd been a minister in the 87 government, that's right. And then a fellow called Simon Upton, who was a fairly liberal National vote, and they decided they would go on the road promoting first past the post. And we immediately attacked them and pointed out that the electoral system was not for politicians. It was for the people to decide who would be a politician. And this resonated as well. And they stopped pretty quickly when this message started to circulate in the media. Here's these politicians telling us what to do. And so we used those kind of psychological techniques to make people distrustful of anybody who was opposing it. And there's a very prominent cartoonist here called Murray Ball, who created well-known characters in the media. And he was very left-wing. And I got in touch with him and asked him if he would do a cartoon for us. And he used his two main characters of his cartoon series, which was, kind of a farmer and his sheepdog, and saying, who should you believe? How did it go? It went, how would you believe those who are telling you not to, not to vote? And those little things carried weight with the general public, because they recognised these people, and it plugged into the basic suspicion of politicians. But then, as the campaign went on, and it got very, very intense and exhausting, the election was and the referendum were in November, and a lot of the energy amongst the key people, started to wane. And also, there's a lack of money to, keep things going properly. But National could see that there is going to be a very close result, and they tried to do a couple of things. One was that the Royal Commission had recommended MMP with a 4% threshold, and about the middle of the year, they announced that it would be a 5% like Germany. This was the kind of, they were thinking ahead, thinking if this gets in, we need to get that threshold up. Yeah. And then the other cynical move, it really was cynical. It was only about 2 or 3 months before the referendum, the then Minister of Justice said, well, you don't really need to vote to change the electoral system. What we will have are citizens-initiated referenda, where the people can initiate votes on big issues. So they rushed through this legislation, which became effective before the election. But when you looked at it, to prompt a referendum on anything, you had to get 10% of the electorate. So it's quite a big ask. But also they were non-binding. So it didn't matter what the result of these were. There were a few in the years afterwards because the government ignored all of them. So, but I think people saw through that. But it was a close run thing. And I remember on election night, I had a big party, and it was very, very close. And you saw these two lines going up, and we just got there. I think that 54.6 to 40. Or 54.6 to 46.3, something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, this really annoyed the hypocrisy of the people who were opposing it can be demonstrated by the fact that on that last big TV broadcast, they had two spokespeople, and one of them was or had been the head of Telecom, and he had benefited massively from the reforms where the Telecom had belonged to the state and then had been privatised, and he'd become the first CEO. And a guy who had been head of Federated Farmers, which was also a conservative group. And I'll never forget this. The interviewer asked, or the MC asked people for a final statement, and this guy leaned towards the camera and said, "No matter what the result of this referendum, we will continue campaigning for government reform." As soon as the referendum came in, they disappeared.
and didn't one of them go to ACT New Zealand after?
And that same guy joined the extreme right-wing party that was formed called ACT, which is still active today, is in the current coalition, and became a member of Parliament on the list. the sort of hypocrisy, and
what I think is the funniest thing about ACT is when I learned about New Zealand politics, I looked at the ACT party and was like, wait a minute, aren't they kind of copying the German FDP? They have like the exact same cyan, yellow and pink combination. It's pretty crazy. They have like almost the same logo. And when I learned that, I was extremely confused, but it's very funny. Even their old logo was like copied from the FDP.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention that, again, because I was going backwards and forwards to Germany, I remember, so it would have been when the CDU was in power with the FDP and Kohl was Chancellor. And when I was in Bonn once, the SDP had a conference, and I got introduced to Edelgard Buhlmann, who was very active. She became, I think, Minister of Social Justice in the SDP government after that. Anyway, she was very interested in what I was doing, and every so often we get these parliamentary exchanges. MPs go to another country and they have a look at what they're doing and vice versa. And she came, fortunately, during 1993 with a German delegation here, and I spoke to her and she agreed to talk, and she did. She did some good talks on radio about how it worked. And this actually triggered off a little bit of anti-German comment, still for about the Second World War and the Nazis. There was still this prejudice, which I think has just about disappeared now. But she is very helpful as well.
I think I find a bit funny about the changed threshold is that one more party would have gotten to parliament if the threshold would have been 4 instead of 5%. The Christian Coalition. I think that's kind of funny that a right-wing party missed out because of a right-wing government.
That's right.
Threshold.
Because the first election with MMP was 96. That's right. The Christian Heritage Party. That's right. They got over 4% and didn't make it, thank goodness. But it actually worked against them. And also with ACT. But this is starting to get into the effect of the system and how it was kind of manipulated as well.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about it? Yeah.
I think they kind of supported ACT in like one electorate with like national, not standing a candidate, and because of that, they would always get the leveling seats.
Yeah. The one mistake that the Electoral Commission, the Royal Commission, made, they looked at the Germans with 5% and or 3 electorate seats to get representation, and they thought, we've only got a population of 4 or 5 million, we just have 1. And they didn't realise, it didn't think it through, that it was relatively easy for a charismatic person to get 1 seat. and therefore representation. The chair of the Royal Commission said to me in the years following, that was the big mistake we made. I really regret that. Because what happened was that in this seat in Auckland, Epsom, very strong national electorate, and they decided to, try and get a minor party support to let the guy leader, who is now Deputy Prime Minister, to just kind of give him the seat and just say to people, give your party vote to National, but vote this guy in. And to start off with, he was completely by himself. But this allowed him, of course, to steadily build up his party. The article that I wrote recently is triggered by the guy who is now the Minister of Justice, Paul Goldsmith, who should be the national MP for that seat. And he's the one who's been going along with this gerrymandering of that seat. And at the recent National Party conference said, we have not yet been able to vanquish MMP. So I wrote about the utter hypocrisy of this man. And you have to keep on doing this to sort of alert people to the double standards.
And I think what I really loved about your article is when you talked to somebody and he wasn't sure if he should join, I think, Labour or the Greens, and you told him that he was more of a natural Green. That was one part of the article I really liked. I'm not sure about the name of who that was, but that it finally became an option for people being a member of another party than just National or Labour. It was something I really enjoyed.
Yes, that was Rod Donald, who the two of us would present ourselves during the campaign that he was very much kind of involved in politics, a bit on the Labour side, whereas I presented myself as an independent. After that big TV event, we went back to the hotel, and he was quite young. I mean, he was mid-30s at that stage. And he said, now I have to decide whether I'm going to join the Labour Party or the Greens. And he was a very colourful character. He wore braces and colourful shirts and, beard. And I said, well, you're obviously a Green. And sure enough, he joined the Greens and became the co-leader. Terrible tragedy there, because he died when he was only in his 40s. He had a very strange...
Did he fall from like a roof?
No, he some strange heart condition. Yeah.
Didn't the female leader also die from the time very recently?
Sorry?
I looked up the core-leaders of the Greens into 2000s, and I think both of them passed away.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yes, the original Greens, and Jeanette Fitzsimons, the other one, she died a few years ago now. Yeah. They're both from unusual heart conditions.
Yeah.
Have to be careful.
The Germany once had like a health minister who wouldn't eat any sugar because of heart conditions. Like he was that into being healthy. And I made a running gag because I found when I looked up Norway, found like an indigenous party leader that looked exactly like him, but a female version. So I had so my conspiracy theory now is that this German health minister and this woman from Norway are now brother and sister secretly, and they aren't telling anybody.
Right.
Going back to the 1993 election, there were also, I think, obviously, people like the Greens would be in favor of changing the system, but there were also more conservative voices like New Zealand First and Winston Peters. How did they support the system? And were there any other conservative groups? And how did the left and right work together in that case?
Well, it's very simple, really. National and anybody supporting them were against MMP and have remained against it. And but there weren't any. I mean, there were small conservative. It was actually a conservative party, and that Christian Heritage Party, and then there was this Winston Peters created New Zealand First before the '96 election, and there were the Greens. There was the New Labour. So there are all these little parties. They all supported MMP, obviously, for obvious reasons. Whereas National did not like it, but had to go along with it. Labour didn't really want it either.
Yeah.
Because why would they? It's a bit like in the UK. I remember that the Electoral Reform, Labour campaign for electoral reform in the UK, were trying to, change the system there. And when Tony Blair became Prime Minister in 1987, they were very optimistic. And he did introduce reforms for Scotland and Wales and for the House of Lords, but he never went that final step because getting absolute power is very seductive. Why would you give up that chance of getting absolute power for several years?
Yeah, I believe my internet cut out. I'm going into the internet. I'm connecting via my phone. It's a very long story, but here we should be back. I think we can continue with the Peters thing and the small parties.
Okay. Well, so what happened before the 96 election was that the small parties who thought they could get in became very active. And this is when ACT was created, which is led by Roger Douglas, who had been the finance minister in the Labour Party government between 84 and 90, and had introduced all these big reforms. Which showed, in fact, what the Labour Party of all parties had actually introduced right-wing policies. Winston Peters created New Zealand First, and he targeted the Maori seats, the separate ones for Maori. And then the left-wing small parties, there was the Greens, New Labour, and another one.
The Democrats.
They formed Democrats. They created the Alliance and went into the election. And but the results of that election were that New Zealand First government had quite a few seats, and so that I think I'm getting this right. Yes, and so formed a coalition with the National Party led by Jim Bolger. I honestly can't remember whether. I don't know when ACT first appeared. I don't think it was then.
ACT was in the first election, I think. I think they got over 5% in the first one immediately.
And the Alliance, that's right, the leader of the Alliance, Jim Anderson, he got it because he had a very strong electorate seat in the south of Christchurch. And so he carried in a few other Alliance members.
For my confusion, I think he is talking about the 1993 election, as their act wasn't founded, and Anderton got a few other people into parliament, but not the first election under MMP, the last without MMP.
But then that broke up, the Alliance, because Jim was a bit too autocratic. And by the time we got to the 1999 election, the Greens had formed a separate party, and they've been represented ever since. As a separate party, whereas the Democrats disappeared and New Labour disappeared, and the Alliance kept going under a different setup, but they disappeared as well. And Winston Peters kind of comes and goes. He, got shafted by the woman who became Prime Minister, Jenny Shipley, for the last 18 months of that second thing. She got rid of Peters, but then he came back, I think, in 2002. So there's been this movement. New Zealand First has always been around, but not always actually in Parliament. And then ACT slowly built up a presence. And as the general political climate changed, not here but everywhere, with the market first approach to politics, it has slowly grown stronger. And interestingly, the Greens have always hung in there, and they have more and more become a receptacle for, I suppose, more left-wing social and economic views. The Labour Party has never quite got over what it did back in the 80s. It's still stained by its abandoning proper socialist principles, and so there's a lot. We don't. I don't know whether you want to talk about what's going on now, but maybe we can talk about what has happened to MMP as a system since it came in.
Yeah.
The guy who led the campaign for better government, Peter Sutcliffe, was very influential in the National Party. And when John Key became Prime Minister,
John Key was National, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was 2008 that John Key became Prime Minister of the National Party. And Peter Sutcliffe was so close to the party that he got John Key to promise there would be another referendum. The Labour Party had a review, I think in 2002, which was very cursory. It didn't do anything. They treated it as a bit of a joke. But Sutcliffe was determined to still try and get rid of him. And what then happened was that we had to do another camp because there's going to be another binding referendum at the 2011 election. And again, I got the call of the Goethe Institute and went back to Germany and gathered more and more information about what was going on. And we managed to get the ear of the then Minister of Justice, Simon Power, who was actually quite liberal. We said to him, if we have a referendum, if there has to be a proper review afterwards, because we weren't happy with the way it stood. This needed some improvements. And in particular, we thought, if it gets done, that we still want a review, And he actually agreed, wrote it into the legislation. Anyway, so we had the referendum, and it was kept with a slightly increased majority over the original one. Then we had the review, a exhaustive review, which came up with various recommendations. One was to lower the threshold to 4% and get rid of this one electorate rule. And again, the cynicism is almost mind-boggling. When the Electoral Commission produced its recommendation, the Labour Party spokesperson got up in Parliament and asked the National Minister of Justice, will you be implementing the Electoral Commission's recommendation? She simply stood up, said no, and sat down again. And that was the end of the matter. And
so they didn't care about reforming it for the better at all. They just wanted to get rid of it to have the two-party duopoly again.
Yeah. And the Labour Party just let it go. They didn't later say we need to do this because they don't want it either. Underneath. They come across as more liberal, so we're stuck with exactly the same system that first started in '96. So I'll send you a copy of that last article I wrote, because the right-wingers, which are increasingly influential, they wanted to get people angry with MMP, and go back to the old system. There's a lot of debate, of course. The other complication in New Zealand is the situation with Maori, the indigenous people. They had the separate party, and they're quite a volatile party. And also, they want, eventually, the activists and a lot of Maori academics and so on, they actually want to have another house, which is half and half Maori and the rest. So there's a very big tension here at the moment, because while I think the majority of people want to recognise what happened, under colonialism, and to make sure there's compensation and all that sort of thing, democracy itself is under threat, because they only amount to less than 20% of the population.
I think they're even overrepresented in the parliament with the number of seats they have. They are more a higher percentage of Maori than they are in the actual population.
Yes, well, if you analyse the MPs in Parliament at the moment, you have the Maori Party, Party Maori. They hold 6 of the 7 separate Maori electorate, and Labour has 1. And Labour normally used to have all of them, and started off as 4. But then you look at the other party, and Labour has quite a strong Maori caucus and prominent Maori people. National have got quite a few Maori MPs, including the Minister for Maori Affairs, or whatever he calls himself these days. And even the ex-party, the leader, has Maori heritage. So we have this very complicated, I think it's roughly a quarter of the MPs are either strongly Maori, like in Party Maori, or have some kind of Maori heritage. And that is reflects the character of the country. I mean, there's been so much intermarriage and so on. So there's a big tension at the moment. It's a very difficult situation, and I'm not quite sure where it's going to go,
I think it's also interesting because in Germany there's also actually a minority party for the Danish minority, but minorities in Germany aren't really talked about. They are the Frisian people, who are half in Germany, half in the Netherlands, but they don't have their own country. And then there are the Serbs, who are in Brandenburg, and they are kind of Slavic people who are just chilling in Germany as their native country.
Yeah, I remember, this is years ago now, over 40 years ago, I was hiking in the Harzburg Hills, and there's this huge monument to the displaced German people from the East, that were after the Second World War, and all this displacement of people. And there's this big monument, and with all the shields and mottos of all the different, German ethnic groups in the East. And if you recall, I think in the first federal government, there was provision for those people. Remember, in the first federal government, there was actually a party for these minority peoples.
It's actually still there, and the party ran again, and
Still
they
there.
have a seat again.
Right.
Since
Okay.
2021, the SW, Südschleswigscher Wählerverband. It's even in German hard to say, but it's like the South Schleswig Voters Association. And they had like a bunch of seats in the early time of the Republic, but they then lost a bunch of support. But they are now back in like Schleswig-Holstein, and they are now more of a like Danish minority, but also social liberal party. So I think they are even interesting for some non-Danish people who might want to protest vote. And I think that's how they are now back in parliament again.
Right. Yeah, so I think that here there will probably be, it depends this current government, the first time there's been three parties. They've had to create a coalition. They've had coalitions in the past, but they usually were just one. And because of that, and the leader of the National Party is a bit hopeless, is not strong enough to sort of control it, because the other two, much more experienced than he is in political manoeuvring.
And it's Winston Peters, who is probably hard to maneuver about. I feel like there's like one of these types of politicians in like every country. I think he has kind of the vibe like Bob Katter in Australia, with like this more folksy guy who is outside of all other parties and doing his own thing and wants to have recognition. There's a guy called Hubert Aiwanger in Germany, like that.
Yeah, I think you had one way back called Franz Josef Strauss in Bavaria, who was very yes, similar. And
Seehofer, and then I forgot how the new guy is called, but the new guy is essentially constantly beefing with the Green Party, even though the Green Party isn't even the most radical party. That would be the Left Party, but it's the constant war in Bavaria.
Yeah. But yes, I mean, I used to be a very strong Green supporter until recently, but they've become too focused on identity politics rather than just a general one. They've become a little bit difficult to follow. And of course, the Te Pāti Māori is very aggressive, and there's been all kinds of ruptures, and what they're trying to do is introduce indigenous or Māori, what they call tikanga, which is their old customs or way of doing into Parliament. And so the haka is a very common kind of demonstration of support or celebration or whatever. And to have this in the House of Parliament is a bit difficult. The other problem is that, as I pointed out to Donald all those years ago, they had just renovated the chamber of the House, and it's just the old Westminster system, with government over there and the opposition over here facing each other, two swords length apart. That's the measure. And I said to Rod, this is entirely the wrong structure for MMP. I said it needs to be like the Bundestag, with a big semicircle, and everybody facing the front. And he said, well, the problem is they've just spent all this money renovating and can't do anything. But this is a problem, because we have this underlying tradition of the Westminster system, whereas Germany, of course, it was completely blown up and started, afresh back in 1949.
And they also had like a multi-party system before. And
That's right, yeah. Whereas, so people don't talk about that at all, really. That the structure of Parliament is entirely inappropriate for MMP. But to try and change that, of course, within the House would cost God knows how many millions of dollars, and of course everybody would be against it. Yeah, anyway, I'm digressing a bit.
And we've talked a bunch about New Zealand. How do you think people in countries like the US, at least on the state level, maybe in a small state like Vermont, or maybe people within like a province in Canada, or on the local level in the UK, can learn from your successes and have maybe a similar campaign that can work and bring more of a multi-party system and a system like MMP? Do you think that could be an option for people there?
Well, my feeling had quite a bit to do with the Labour campaign for electoral reform in England. As it happened, I attended at least two of their annual conference and spoke at them about MMP, and had meetings in Westminster and this sort of thing. And they even had prominent Labour members on their council and who became ministers in Blair's government, and who were all for reform. But it became obvious to me that in somewhere like the UK, it is England, I should say, it's impossible. There is so much tradition, inertia, conservatism, and that's what to change from first past the post. They did actually have Cameron had this thing. What did he go for? He did it. Yeah, he actually did that, and of course it was just rubbish. And I have no optimism whatsoever. The Scots, of course, they copied us when they formed their own parliament, and I had a look around their building not long after. Beautiful setup they've got in Edinburgh. And the Welsh have got some kind of version of this as well. I have no optimism whatsoever. I don't know whether the Labour campaign for electoral reform still exists, actually. As far as I can't see anything happening on a national level in the United States. And,
but still, it was like a partial success on the local level. Like maybe 40 years ago, tell somebody that Scotland one day could have a multi-party system. That would have been crazy. I also agree that it would be like very impossible on the US level. But I think there could be changes on like the state level in like especially New England, where you have like similar populations and sometimes even more rural and more like people know each other, which is like similar to New Zealand, and where maybe changes could be made on the local level. And at some point you have like multiple parties endorsing like members of the House of Representatives within first past the post, and then maybe over that where there could be pressure be made necessary, or the best thing to look at the state and the like city council level. Do you think there could be something similar there, completely ignoring the national level?
Oh, I guess so. I have no idea what goes on at state level, really.
Fair.
But obviously, especially a small state, but they have to form a group, like the Electoral Reform Coalition, and come up with, good arguments. And I think that they could use New Zealand, they could also use Scotland to show how something like MMP would work better for representation within their state. But without knowing the actual climate of opinion in a state, I really couldn't say. The thing is that every so often here, the STV is raised, and we've literally just had yesterday the final day of the local body election, and Dunedin has STV, and I think STV is really, really good for local, where the parties are not involved. But if you're going to have parties running an area, then you have to have a version of MMP. The Irish.
What's interesting is I'm from Germany, but my favorite election system is actually the Danish one. They essentially do a bunch of stuff that MMP does, but they actually have one vote. They take like the country, then do different multi-member electorates, and then they let people choose in an open list which candidate they want to rank higher. So let's say that our province has like 10 seats. If a party gets 30%, they get 3 seats, and those 3 seats are then ranked by how many people liked each candidate most. So the interesting thing there is that you have one vote, but you can either vote for a party or for a candidate, depending on what you care for. That's why I kind of like the Danish system more, because it eliminates one of the 2 votes, and then they have leveling seats. I think like they have like 150 like local seats and 15 leveling seats, which I like more because it retains the aspects that MMP has with the party lists, but there are more local representatives because of the multi-member districts, and especially the Danish ballot. I think it's so much cooler than the German one, because the names are below the party, so they literally run below the party or run on the party. That's something that's pretty cool. Was there, by the way, ever an open list discussed?
Well, there is. The main argument against MMP is closed list, and they keep on, the opponents consistently say that list MPs are appointed by the party, that they're not chosen by the voter. My argument to that is, well, the candidates for the electorate seats are also appointed, if you like, and you do have alternatives. The one suggestion I've made, that sounds really interesting. I have to have a closer look at it, but the Bavarian land elections, they have open lists, don't they? And where you can either just tick the list, or you can tick one candidate, which
I didn't know about very
it endorses the list, but it gives that particular candidate a separate vote. And there was one example years ago that with the Christian Socialists, there was a woman who was in the governing party who was annoying the others, and they stuck her right down the list. And the general electorate agreed with a lot of her argument, and they actually put her back up to the top of the list simply by voting for her on the list. It also endorsed the party, but so I say we should just do that. So it makes it tricky.
I think
for
that's actually the same system used in Denmark. That's why I like the system. I didn't know Bavaria used it, but I prefer Denmark because they have like a lower threshold. And they get some crazy parties in, but in Germany you also have the BSW, who are like mainly pro-Russian party that's just getting annoyed at the Greens, named after Sarah Wagenknecht. And you have like the far-right AFD, and Denmark isn't doing much worse with that. Maybe sometimes some crazy small parties get in, but you also have like some smaller green parties and small left parties. Here Mr. Temple needed to leave, but I'm still incredibly thankful. This interview is kind of a dream coming true, and I might have sounded a bit starstruck, as the referendum is like a very big thing to me, and talking to somebody from it is like a very cool thing that I could have never mentioned a year ago. And I hope videos like this are making you more positive, that there are people that can change the world, and that are continuing to do so. In the description I will link Mr. Temple's website and also a very recent article by him in the Otago Daily Times, where I talked more about the tax on MAP. And I really love people that are pushing all of their work for their entire life, even at a pretty high age, and therefore this is something pretty cool and very positive, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Don't forget to check out Mr. Temple and all his future work, and subscribe to his channel of course for more interviews. I have some pretty crazy ideas that you definitely don't want to miss, and also donate to the channel if you want to. Here you can find a different video I did with Jonathan Martin of Framingham University on how to actually have winning third parties in the USA, and another video there I put all of the results of the UK elections together into a massive parliament with almost 2,000 seats. Definitely a crazy thing that you will enjoy if you have enjoyed this. Thanks for all of your support. In the description you can join my Discord server, but I'm going to say bye.